you learn in this business, particularly if you're not a lawyer, you learn not to read too much into how the oral arguments go in any particular appeals court. But a lot of seasoned observers who were watching the arguments today or listening in on the arguments today seemed to conclude that the former president is not on very solid ground in terms of this legal effort to keep his records away from that investigation. If he does, in fact, lose at this appeals court, which is what most observers are predicting, he presumably will keep appealing up to the United States Supreme Court. And that, if nothing else, will succeed in further delaying the matter. And that is not incidental in this case. That, in fact, appears to be his only real game at this point. He does not have any great legal arguments to make for why his White House records should be handed over. That's why there was a decisive earlier federal ruling against him. That's why things went so poorly for him today in the courtroom at the appeals court. The legal arguments on his side are gossamer. But if he can stretch out the legal proceedings to last as long as possible, hopefully through next year, well then, hey, maybe he'll get lucky and Republicans will win back control of Congress next fall, whereupon they will undoubtedly fully get back in line behind Trump and they will shut the investigation down entirely. Why would they want to investigate the January 6th attack? So his delay strategy is really his only strategy. Every day he delays, every day this bangs around in the court system another day is another day he effectively wins. You'd think the courts would get wise to that and have some sort of way to short circuit that when that's the defense's, or when that's somebody's full strategy in terms of bringing something before the courts. But alas, the courts appear to be sort of deliberately blind to that as a legal strategy up and down our judicial system. That said, the January 6th investigation in Congress is not itself just poking along. We heard from a member of that investigation, Congressman Pete Aguilar, last night, that more than 250 people have already sat for interviews with them, either because these witnesses said yes when they were asked politely, or these witnesses didn't have a choice because they were subpoenaed and you are legally obligated to respond to a subpoena. Just tonight, we learned that the latest person to sit for an interview was Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. He apparently was questioned by the investigators today for more than 4 hours. Now, you'll recall Brad Raffensperger was on the receiving end of a phone call from Trump after the election, a phone call we've all heard because it was recorded and later released to the public. A phone call in which Trump hounded Raffensperger to change the election results in the state of Georgia, to, quote, find enough votes in Georgia to make it look like Trump won there when, in fact, he had lost there. That call to Brad Raffensperger and other forms of pressure that Trump and the Trump White House put on other Georgia officials, that pressure is already the subject of a criminal investigation in Georgia. It's being carried out by Fulton County's prosecutor, Fani Willis. Among other things to know about that criminal investigation, my favorite fact about it is that Fani Willis has hired an experienced RICO prosecutor to help lead that investigation into that pressure on Georgia elections officials. RICO is the statute they use against organized crime. So, hey, stick that in your stocking and call it Christmas. And I mean, you know, broad strokes, we know that the investigation appears to be looking at the January 6th Capitol attack itself as essentially just one part, the big public violent part of an extended, complex effort by Trump and those around him to try to keep him in power even after he lost the election. Public reporting has shown that a key part of that effort was hatched by Trump and a Justice Department official named Jeff Clark, who wanted to try to use the power of the U.S. Justice Department to essentially force or induce states that Trump lost to nevertheless give Trump their electoral votes. Jeff Clark, that previously low-profile former Justice Department official, he has refused to comply with subpoenas in this investigation, just like Trump advisor Steve Bannon has. Bannon, as you know, has already been hit with criminal federal charges for rejecting those subpoenas. Well, tonight, just before we got on the air, the January 6th investigation released its formal report on Jeff Clark rejecting their subpoenas. They're going to vote on this report tomorrow at the end of the day. If passed as prologue, that vote will probably be overwhelming, if not unanimous, that Jeff Clark should be referred to the U.S. Justice Department for potential prosecution, just as they referred Steve Bannon for potential prosecution, and then DOJ ultimately followed up and brought that indictment. Here's part of what that report says about why Jeff Clark got subpoenaed by this investigation in the first place. It says, quote, according to documents and testimony gathered by the Select Committee, in the weeks leading up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, Jeffrey Bossert Clark participated in efforts to delegitimize the results of the 2020 election and delay or interrupt the peaceful transfer of power. The Select Committee believes that Mr. Clark had conversations with others in the federal government, including members of Congress, regarding efforts to delegitimize, disrupt, or overturn the election results in the weeks leading up to January 6th. The Select Committee seeks documents and testimony from Mr. Clark to obtain a complete understanding of the attempts to use the Justice Department to delegitimize and disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, including illuminating the impetus for Mr. Clark's involvement in the first place and with whom he was collaborating, both inside and outside the government, to advance these efforts. Again, the January 6th investigation, we know as of an interview on this show last night, we know that they've had more than 250 people in the witness chair already. And as such, they may already have a pretty good idea as to who Jeff Clark was collaborating with inside and outside the government on his alleged efforts to use the power of the U.S. Justice Department to keep Trump in power after he lost. But in this formal report that was just released a couple of hours ago tonight, the fact that the investigation is willing to go out formally and say that among the people they believe he collaborated with were multiple members of Congress, serving members of Congress, well, that's news.